I'm Marla Blow. I am with the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, where I lead social impact for North America. And something I have in common with all of the wonderful panelists here today is that prior to joining Mastercard, I was an entrepreneur myself. So I've been in your shoes. I know what you're going through. I know how demanding and difficult these times are. But I also want to say congratulations to all of you. You've made the decision to grow your business. You are actively engaged in going through all the tough times, the next big challenges associated with scale. So I'm looking forward to this conversation about building a brand, about how you launched your business and how you go forward from here. Having a good business idea is just the beginning. How do you turn that into a product, into a strategy, and how do you maintain the stamina that it takes to deliver on all of that? So I'm really excited about this. Why don't we jump in with some more introductions? Morgan, why don't we start with you? Can you introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about your business?
Absolutely. Thank you. So I am Morgan Mercer, the founder and CEO of Vantage Point, and we leverage technology for training employees around soft skills such as diversity, bias, anti-racism, anti-harassment, etc. So we actually take virtual reality and we immerse users into photorealistic scenes. We create the emotional relevancy to the problem, the situational awareness of the problem. And then through that, we actually teach users how they can be better upstanders, better allies, better colleagues, et cetera. So we work with Fortune 500s, we work with startups, we've trained across 13 different industries across the globe and in the US. And we are very passionate about solving some of these problems using technology.
Bravo. Arian, why don't we go to you?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm Arian Simone, general partner and co-founder of the Fearless Fund. We invest in women of color businesses, pre-seed, seed, Series A. We are the first women of color fund that is built by us for us. And that's probably it, and I would say in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. And why don't we go to Sharifa? Take it away.
Hi, I'm Sharifa Murdoch. Thank you for having me. I am the co-owner of Liberty Fairs, Liberty Fashion Lifestyle Fairs, which is fashion trade shows. We own 3 trade shows, Liberty being a men's trade show, Capsule being a contemporary women's trade show, and Cabana being a resort trade show. I also am the owner of Envision Festival, which is a youth cultural festival in Brooklyn, New York, concentrating on the future of our youth culture.
Thank you very much for that. So why don't we jump right into business? And Arian, let's start with you. You know, it might seem obvious or go without saying, but entrepreneurs really need to want their business to grow, right? It doesn't happen by accident. And frankly, scaling isn't necessarily for everybody. But if that decision is made, how should ambitious entrepreneurs start that process? And how do you create an action plan, a business plan with realistic growth targets to achieve it? You know, why is it important to build those plans? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, completely. The first step to growing and scaling, of course, is going to be where we come into play, which is access to capital. And in order to grow and scale at a very rapid rate and large rate, you are going to need that access. And every investor is interested in your exit strategy, your acquisition, where is the endpoint? So in order to build with the endpoint in mind, you're going to have to set up what those milestones look like, what that process looks like, and have that pretty much solidified. So that's definitely why it's important.
And to just take a second here and just talk a little bit about that access to capital. For me, my experience of running FS Card prior to Mastercard was all about chasing capital. Can you just talk a little bit more about that access to capital and your approach to ensuring businesses are in a position to go and climb that hill?
Most definitely. I got into this space actually to solve the problem that I was having myself. I was a 21-year-old young Black woman in college at Florida University, raising capital for my mall-based retail store. And I realized how difficult it was to raise capital. And I said, you know what, one day you're going to be the business investor that you were looking for. And I'm now just walking in the manifestation of that. Currently, right now, Black women are receiving 0.0006% of venture funds. Women of color, I saw your face, Sharifa. Yes, these statistics are true and real.
I am sitting here like in awe. Just
no,
so
but
unbelievable.
It's real and it's true. And it's hard to believe because Black women are the most founded entrepreneurial demographic. We're starting businesses more than any other demographic out there. Women of color as a whole are still under 1%, even as a collective. Women in its entirety are under 5%. Some studies have been saying 2.8% for 2019, some as high as 4%. But at the end of the day, they're still under 5%. With that being said, there's also, because we hear that as a lack of diverse investments, there's also a lack of diverse investors. The venture capital industry is 80% white male, which why we got on the other side of the table to help solve this problem. This won't get solved overnight. This didn't start overnight, and it's going to take a lot of movement and collaboration and allies in order to move the needle.
Very well said. Thank you for that. And you are singing my song. So I feel like I need to say, something like, amen, right? Like, and say that, you're telling my story for sure. Sharifa, let's talk a little bit about building a successful team, right? Oftentimes the first thing entrepreneurs do when they do manage to access the capital that Arian was just talking about is building a team. How do you attract top tier talent that believes in your mission? What do you look for in an employee?
It's interesting. I have an untraditional way. I kind of look to the people that are around me. I do speak to a lot of my colleagues and people that it's basically word of mouth for me. I want to know that someone believes in my dream and that someone is really on top of it and that wants to be a part of it instead of forcing the issue. So I don't go out there looking. I kind of have people come to me in regards to what I'm doing, just because I feel like when we go out to look, sometimes just the decisions that people are making on why they're taking the job is only personal for them. And I want people to be more engaged in what I'm doing and what I have, like what my goals are. So I more attract people when they come to me and I speak to them about what we're doing. And if they feel like they're interested and they're excited, then I take them on board. And I also look to the team that I currently have to find the next. Who is the other person that you think we should bring on board? That's how I grow all of the teams that I have. It's so important to kind of get it word of mouth, just because that person to me won't let their friend down. They don't want to let their friend down. So it's important to kind of keep it within the circle that we're in.
Wanted to follow on to that and just check in with you on outsourcing. To what extent do you apply and use outsourcing when you're looking for talent, when you may have some challenges attaining it or having that immediate access to a person?
I use a lot of recruiters, and I think that using the recruitment within the fashion industry, it's like 24/7 recruiters like that, just for the knowledge and just to know what's out there. Especially today, it's we have a lot of people on unemployment right now. So for me, using the recruiters is safer because we are looking for a certain kind of talent for different positions. And I think that the recruitment is very important during this process as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Morgan, let's turn to you and get some of your thoughts on this. When you think about sustainable growth and how and what you need in order to build a brand, how do you foster the culture of a culture of inclusion and diversity during rapid growth? Is that an easy thing to skip? And what can you do early on in the business to prevent that kind of a breakdown and skipping of that important consideration?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is really easy to skip over it because a lot of times companies will go from 0 to 10, 10 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 250 employees, and then they'll look back and they'll say what happened, right? And at each of these pivotal growth stages within your company, that's where a lot of times things will break down because founders and senior leaders are typically so focused on the growth and so focused on the numbers and so focused on making sure that they have the staffing to deliver on contracts or they're able to fulfill their orders or whatever it may be, that they're not noticing the little breakdowns that are happening within their culture. So the best thing to do is to actually be proactive with it. And the one thing I say is HR is actually crucially important. So it's important to have HR way sooner than you think that you need it. It's really important to actually adopt systems that support and foster inclusive cultures and create those early on. Don't try to introduce them once you're 500 employees large, right? Actually adopt those early on so that even when you're scaling and even when you're growing, you actually have systems that you've already created that are already ingrained into your culture that you're passing down into other employees. Because when you think about it, typically when companies hit these high growth modes, they're hiring 10 employees or 20 employees or multiple roles at the same time. And so when people are being integrated into your culture, it's really hard to integrate somebody into a culture and also introduce new systems that aren't already integrated into your culture and get them both to stick and get it all to work. So it's really important to actually be thinking about inclusive cultures and these systems that scale, not when you're 500 employees, but when you're first starting your company, and be adopting them and make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Yep. And do you have a rule of thumb, Morgan? Do you have when you hit X number of employees, you should be thinking about HR, you should be thinking about more systems being put in place? You mentioned don't wait till you're 500, but there's a lot between, just getting started and 500. Do you have when do you know you've crossed the line or when you're ready?
You should always be doing it, right? It doesn't matter if you're 3 employees, it doesn't matter if you're 5, it doesn't matter if you're 10, you should always be doing it, because when you think about every single person on your team, they're all an extension of your values, they're all an extension of your mission, they're all an extension of whatever it is that you're creating. So you should always be doing it, because then if you have a manager, maybe you have a COO when you start out, it's you and your COO, and your COO ends up hiring people. You want to make sure that you've already instilled that, even if it's just you and your COO, so that anybody your COO is hiring also fits within the hopes and aspirations you have for the kind of company that you want to build.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Let me pull that thread just a little bit further and open up to the rest of the panel. And just even with what Morgan mentioned and building systems early and focusing on the culture, you still run the risk of change and employee turnover being one of the hardest things to manage, given heavy workloads, products that that can't be produced fast enough to meet the demand if things are going well. Mm-hmm. How do you handle employee turnover when the pressure is on? And what advice do you have for other budding entrepreneurs like us to handle that and avoid it happening? And I'll open that up to the entire group.
I mean, I would like to just say what I do with my team is I speak to them prior, right? I think it's important for you to communicate with your team on a weekly basis and do check-ins. Like, how are you feeling? Do you feel overwhelmed? Like, because if you have those conversations, the employee turnover might be less, or you might still have the employee turnover, but you're ready for it and you know what's to come. I think it's important when we communicate with the employees and your team to say, listen, how can I take some of this off your plate? How can I help you? Really and truly I believe in over communicating to really and truly get the point across, because that's what I think we're missing when you have the high employee turnovers. I think that employees get so fed up that you didn't communicate with them that they just quit. And instead of them coming out, and it's on both ends, right? Instead of them saying, look, I'm having this issue, but they might not feel comfortable coming to you. But if you open up the door to make that a little bit more comfortable having that conversation, then I think you would, have less employee turnover. That's just what I really and truly strive for, because once you find a good employee, I think all of us on this phone know, like just need to try to keep them happy. So I do think it's in our best interest, all of us and all of the people out there, to kind of communicate with their employees prior to it happening, and really and be all very authentic about it too. Don't just do it because I'm telling you to do it. Do it because you care and you really want to know what your employees are feeling. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Sharifa, I think that's excellent, because it also helps you establish the type of culture that you want for your company. In addition, and I know Morgan can appreciate this, but there's technology now that's being developed to even see the patterns of when somebody might leave. I met with a young African-American founder, Kendra, at Unboxed, and that's what she's building. It's the technology pattern. So her business is completely B2B. And what it shows you is that, say, if somebody's responding very, I would say, brief to certain emails and certain responses, the technology is tracking, oh, is this employee of yours engaged? Are they probably headed out the door? And what those patterns are over time to see what their morale level is at the company. And I found that quite unique. And I wonder what that's been looking like even during the time of COVID. Because certain people at certain levels have been getting paid more from the government than they have their jobs, which I've noticed that even with our portfolio companies. We have a portfolio company and they were like, we never had employee turnover issues until this.
Yeah.
And it was because of the level of positions of which they were hiring people in the food and beverage industry. It's not like they needed to pay high top salaries or C-suite salaries. They're like, our executive level people are still here. But anybody that was around the $15 an hour or $20 an hour part-time, they're like, we're now competing with the government as far as keeping them here. So I found that to be quite interesting at a time like this. I said, well, I wonder what Kendra's technology is doing right now and how it's reading people's responses as far as if they're going to stay, go, or where they're at. But yeah, there's technology being developed in order to help you ensure that retention.
I'm going to need that information from you later.
Yeah, such a smart idea. What's that? Let's just do. What's the name of that company again? Let's just put that on here.
Unboxed. BOXT. Yes.
BOXT. Okay.
I was like, oh, you are sharp.
I like it.
It makes so much sense.
So my advice would actually be very similar to Sharifa's, because that's what I've learned is the best thing to do is to create an open door policy. And when employees come to you with things, you need to really listen. And I think a lot of times founders, leaders, CEOs, executives, etc., they care because they have a reason for caring. And I think like that's where I fell into in the early days. And it was one of the biggest things that I had to learn, honestly, was I cared because I had a reason for caring. I care because I want my employees to be productive because the company succeeds, right? But it's a very it's a very selfish reason for caring almost, because you need to care because you care about your employees. You need to care because you want your employees to love coming to work every day. You want your employees to do well. You want your employees to thrive. You want your employees to feel satisfied. You want your employees to be growing. And when you shift the dynamic mentally for the reason why you care, it creates a different dynamic. And then having these open door policies where you're doing one-on-ones, I do biweekly one-on-ones with all of my direct reports, and then, or biweekly one-on-ones, with all of my indirect reports, and weekly one-on-ones with all of my direct reports. Basically having a system like that in place. And obviously as you scale, it's not necessarily the most feasible, but your org chart changes, right? So I'm not always going to have X number of people reporting to me. Soon it'll be managers, leaders, and there are different ways you can do it. You can do walking meetings, just a quick check-in. It doesn't always have to be 30 minutes, but having a space where your employees know this is a dedicated time where I can talk to you and you will listen. And then as a leader, actually listening. So if your employee says, I really don't like the music, or I feel really, disconnected and unengaged or lonely working in a remote setting, or whatever it may be, you may think it's just a comment in passing. But if an employee says something, you have to think about an employee saying something to you as a leader or you as a boss. It takes a lot of courage. And so they're probably not just saying it as this just a complaint to overlook. And so you need to actually take these things seriously, and then making sure that that's also ingrained in your culture. So if somebody makes a mistake or if somebody complains about something, making sure that employees feel like they have an open space to do that, because if employees feel like they can't actually voice their concerns with a project, they're not going to voice their concerns with their role. So it's really important to be instilling it in your culture, but creating the open door policy. And then as a leader, actually caring about the employees that work for you and work on your team.
Yep, absolutely. Very well said. Let's talk about some of the other challenges. Arian, you have spent the most time and seen the most of businesses, seen the most variety of businesses. What are the things that you see that founders need to consider and prepare for before they start to scale?
While we're talking about team building, something I think that is so important, which I would say ties into the question that you're asking. People have to be mindful, and I tell people all this time, to build your team from the top down. And I know everybody's like, what does that mean? As an entrepreneur, so often all you know is that you're overwhelmed and that you need help. And I'm like, okay, you can't just go out and get the person that can work for you at $10 an hour. That's just not the answer that you need to the actual problem that you're having. With that being said, I always tell people, get your advisory board first. These people have enough expert knowledge and enough experience to be able to tell you what you need to look out for. These are the pain points that you're going to run into. This is what the future is going to look like. Like I said, always built with the end in mind. And those advisors will be able to take you there first. Then, of course, your legal. Then, of course, your finances need to be in order. And then from there, your middle level management after you've done a top level management. And then from there on down, I would say look at the bottom. We even had to build the fund the same way. We brought the advisors on first, then the investment committee board, then we hired internally for day to day. But we knew that we had enough knowledge at the top level that could pretty much show us how to grow and scale. And that's what I would say would be the first step as far as to growing and scaling your business, to ensure that your team has a solid foundation, and don't get caught up in the fact that you're overwhelmed and just want to hire somebody for $10 an hour because that's what you can afford to, because that may be what you can afford to right now, but you need to build on where you're going and not just where you're at.
Mm-hmm.
Nice feedback. Morgan, scaling a business doesn't come for free, right? And we've talked here already a little bit from Arian's comments at the very beginning about where the funds come from, the challenges of accessing capital, the very small amounts of capital that get allocated to Black women. What's your journey been? How have you found the money to invest for growth? And you outlined some of the funding paths that people might consider, bootstrapping and otherwise, given some of the daunting challenges about accessing capital in the traditional ways that we all may be accustomed to thinking of it.
Yes, absolutely. And I love the statistics that you pulled out, Arian, because they're true, right? They're real. And I think as a founder, as a Black founder going into raising, it was something that was very visible to me because I did go the VC route. That's not to say that everyone has to go the VC route, but I went the VC route, and every single investor that you would see and every single founder that you would see for the most part was primarily homogenous, right? And it is very disheartening to not see people who look like you, especially when you're going through a process that's already hard as a founder, and it's notoriously hard, right? If you Google it, the top articles that come up around fundraising it's a difficult journey, and it takes commitment, dedication, time, patience, etc. And so I think that to me was interesting. The one thing I would say, just as a bit of feedback before diving into the different funding paths, is make sure that you have really strong allies and make sure you have really strong mentors. Because I actually had other minority women who were founders. And when I came to them and I said, I don't know if I can do this, they were like, I did it, you can do it too. And that's really important, no matter what type of capital you're seeking or how you're seeking to grow and scale your company. But there are a variety of different ways. So bootstrapping is always an option, especially if you're in the B2C space. It's a really great option because going to market for a consumer product is a lot easier than going to market for a B2B product, especially a technology product. So it really depends on your industry. It depends on your market, and it depends on the barriers to entry. But B2C is typically pretty good for bootstrapping. And the thing with bootstrapping is that you do typically, there's an upside, right? Because you're going to start raising, if you do take venture capital at a later point in your business, so you'll actually retain more ownership. The other ways that you can do it are you can go for friends and family, obviously, depending on the group of people raising. That's not always an option, right? That's not always an option. That's something that we know. So there are other small business grants through the SBA. There are loan programs, again, not always an option. There are accelerator program grants. There are actually some accelerators, including one that I advise for. It's Headstream Accelerator. It's backed by Melinda Gates, and they don't take any equity, and they give you $80,000 of investment of capital. And so there are accelerator programs out there. I wouldn't necessarily say they're the most common, but there are programs out there that won't take equity and will give you capital, and they will align with your mission. And so what I would say is, as a founder or who's building a business or who's building a company, really question, what is your goal? Is your goal in IPO? Is your goal in an acquisition? And if not, that's fine too. But what is your goal, and what types of capital are you seeking? And then from that, really look for people who align, whether it be VCs, whether it be startup programs and accelerator programs, whether it be grants, loans, pitch competitions. There are numerous avenues, and it's really just finding people who align with you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's great set of comments. Sharifa, let's talk about the next point, diversify, right? And thinking about how people can establish multiple streams of revenue. Why is that important for founders to expand beyond one product as you think about scaling and think about growth, managing multiple revenue streams and the back end of it? How does that help? Talk a little bit about your experience there.
Well, listen, I think that we're all in a time right now where we had to pivot. I think that this is a prime example of why we should have multiple revenue streams. For my example, it's like I'm in events, right? And we are in this situation where you can't really have events, and you can't like be in person at different things. We can't have crowds. So before even COVID started, we started looking at different outlets on how we can change the fashion industry and still continue having the fashion industry out there with not having these large events. And we had to pivot into doing everything digital. The only issue with that is that the people have to be ready for the digital, right? Certain people are, and certain people are not. Within the fashion industry, such a leading industry, sometimes we lack understanding on how important technology is, because we are so used to seeing each other face to face, and we're such a community where we need to get together and kind of like mingle. It's really difficult to change, but having the different revenue streams as far as events going into pivoting into digital was because we had to. And I think it's so important for anyone whenever starting a business to have different revenue streams and have different ideas on how your one concept can do different things, right? Because you never know, like we are in this position today, on what can happen. I had an event which I pivoted with the trade shows to digital. Same thing with the festival. I had to pivot and do something digital, but differently. Instead of me having a festival online, what we did is had to pivot in selling content. So it's important to just have these different ideas going before these type of things happen, because you never know what position it will lead you in.
Do you think you would have done it if you hadn't had to? Or was it a function? Had you been thinking about it ahead of
We
the
were
pandemic?
always thinking about it. I think when it comes to the fashion industry knew that the B2B business was kind of going downhill, and you had to do D2C business. So we've already been thinking about it. It's just COVID, of course, pushed it probably, I'm going to say, a year earlier than what it was supposed to. So of course, every single person within the fashion industry that was not digital is like rushing now to get everything done. But as a business, we have always thought about it. We saw it from 3 years ago, what the industry was changing to be. COVID, of course, just pushed us a year or so forward, but honestly, it's what needed to happen. And I think that going even after COVID, yes, we will do events, but I think that the digital portion of it will stay, because people are going to be so inundated with like making sure that their business is protected now. So I think it was necessary, honestly, to change how the business was being done from prior.
Yep, got it. Let's do a quick round robin before we go back into the longer answers. Technology, as you just mentioned, Sharifa, makes it easier and less expensive to scale a business, right? So would love each of you to just rattle off one or two essential products, technology systems, automation tools that founders should invest in early on that will help them scale.
We can just go.
Yeah, go for it.
Mine would probably be different, and I'm doing it just for my industry, but for the sake of the discussion, I wanted to say Carta. And what Carta does, it helps you from an entrepreneur standpoint. It will help you manage your cap table. If you are one that has investors and you'd like for them to know where the company valuation lies, where their ownership in the company lies, and what that current state always looks like. From the fund side, it's somewhat pretty much similar. It has all of our investors, of course, listed, what ownership of the fund that they have, the valuation of the fund in its totality, the portfolio companies and their valuations are back there as well too. But it's something that I'm like 120% stand behind from working in this space, that I would definitely advise.
Yeah, good suggestion.
From my standpoint on fashion side, I think that there's multiple of these programs, but the one that I would say is JOR. JOR is a program where everyone, all of the fashion industry can put line sheets up and retailers are invited to go on and see everything that the collections are showing.
Oh.
So there are multiple of these platforms, like I mentioned, but currently, like for me, we've been using Joor, and it's been an amazing experience for us.
How do you spell that?
So
Joor.
Joor. Okay.
Yeah.
I have four, and they're my favorites. So I love automations. I love automating things. So a few, I would say Zapier is really great because you can actually set automation. So for example, it integrates with all of your systems. It integrates with like 200 applications, everything from Salesforce to Hootsuite to your Gmail to your Twitter. So you can literally say, if somebody tweets back at me, reply with X, and you literally create an automation. You can say, if somebody opens my email, send X response or book Y meeting. So literally you can create any automation you can dream of, and it's so easy to use. The second one I would say is Airtable. I am obsessed with Airtable. It is so intuitive, easy to configure, really incredible. It's like a better version of Asana or Trello, and it's something that I now have all of my team on because it's more so, it's really easy to move things around and to navigate. They actually just launched a new version of Airtable where you can build products on Airtable. So it's great for everything from building org charts to all the way to building editorial calendars or building a roadmap for a product launch. I would say Mail Merge is another really good one. I use it for all of our press pitches, where basically you upload a CSV, you can auto schedule and send out a mass email blast to thousands of people. That's my third one. I'm trying to think of my fourth one, but I would say those are my top three.
Those are your top three. Thank you. Those are great tips. I'm going to make a note of this myself. Let's go on to advice. Let's talk about some feedback for our audience. Arian, let's start with you. And we've heard some of the comments here already. I think Morgan mentioned this explicitly earlier. Mentorship is critical, especially in the early stages. You match founders with a mentor at the Fearless Fund. How can business owners get access to that support network? And talk a little bit about why you incorporated that into what you do at the Fearless Fund.
Oh my gosh. It's been incorporated because we understand, especially in this community, there's a lack of access to capital, mentors, and network. Those are the three biggest, I would say, pain points as far as what you need to get to going. And mentorship, as I stated before, I build teams from the top down, not the bottom up. And being that the top down, I consider our advisors even mentors. I believe wholeheartedly that mentorship, people can definitely, and some people would like to say sponsors, people who open the door for you, but people who can clearly train you and teach you on where they have been is just key. It's something I believe in. And we do beyond just like a basic mentorship program. We pair them up with companies. So whether it's any company, I'll use an example. So if we have a portfolio company in the food and beverage space and say they're a beverage product, we would reach out to Coke's Venture and Emerging Brands, and we would have them to start that relationship. Now, this becomes very mutually beneficial for multiple reasons. And one of the reasons is that they can later on acquire that company. But if this company that's helping you grow and train you and they're teaching you the ropes is your potential acquisition, this is a beautiful marriage. So these people, now that's if you choose to sell there. You can choose to go on wherever you choose to, but the company, it works well for the company because they're like, hey, we want first eyes and first dibs on potential acquisitions. And then it works well for the entrepreneur because they're like, well, I want the C-suite level knowledge you guys have over here to apply to my business. So that's pretty much how that marriage looks. Now, overall, I say I definitely just believe in it. We don't run a formal incubator or an accelerator, but we do plan to give you as many resources as possible to help you up, for success for your business.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. That's great. And you partner people up with a company. That's such a smart way of doing that kind of mentoring. Morgan, let's talk about the numbers and some advice around that. When you run a business, you have to fall in love with the numbers. What have been some of the hardest money lessons you've learned along your way to scale, and how can you share tips about managing the finances?
So many. So a couple things. Number one is a lot of times founders want to move quickly. And the reason why founders want to move quickly is because you're always on a short timeline, right? When you raise, it's 12 to 18 months, sometimes 24. And so you're locked into your business metrics. So you're trying to move as quickly as possible. And some of the mistakes that I've made are when you're trying to move quickly, you're not necessarily vetting agencies or vetting people the same way that you would. And so you can end up bringing on an agency. You don't put the ground rules in place because you're outsourcing. We've outsourced different things. So for example, a brand agency, you're getting a new logo made like we are right now. You're trying to rapidly expand your technical development to deliver a product to a client on an expedited timeline, whatever it may be. And because you're trying to move quickly, you're not making the most thoughtful decisions, and you end up wasting twice as much time and wasting money because you're either you've underestimated your scope and you're delivering it late, and now it's twice as expensive as what they scoped out. And you probably would have been better off going with a different agency had you spent an extra week searching for one, whatever it may be. So I think that founders have a tendency to try to move really quickly. And a lot of times it ends up coming back and biting you in the butt, so to speak. And then the other thing I would say is a lot of times there's this kind of like, move fast and break things mentality as well when it comes to scaling your team. So it's kind of like hire people and then see if they work or see if it fits. And what I would say is that, it's hard as a founder, and you all hit on it so perfectly. When you have a role open, it's kind of like, okay, you have so much to do and you just want to get somebody placed in it immediately. So as a founder, you're in this place where you're like, okay, I want to bring people on. I want them to take over these responsibilities, whatever. But bringing on the wrong people is just as bad as having the role open, if not worse. And so it's better to
say it again.
Yes.
It actually ends up wasting a lot of money and wasting a lot of time. And when you think about how much time it even wastes of yours, right, to come back in and fix the work and, hire the right person, whatever it may be. And that's also money, because that translates to other things you could have done for the business. And so I would say that those are probably the two biggest things that I learned in my journey.
Absolutely. Would love to hear from everyone and about how you stay on top of cash flow and keep your business in the black. Sharifa, let's start with you on that one. How do you keep up with what's going on financially in the business?
Well, I am the cheapest person when it comes to business, to be honest with you. I think it's important, a couple of things, right? Weekly check-ins. I'm a big fan of weekly check-ins just because something always comes up. You never know what's getting paid out. I think that it's important for you to have weekly check-ins with your financial advisor or whoever, your CFO, because just to make sure your spending is not exceeding what you currently have. And I think like always overestimating. So for me, I always overestimate the budget, meaning like if I'm going to make X amount of dollars, I double that in my mind so that I know what I have. I'm not overspending, and I always try to get to a 50% margin. So if you always have to get to a 50% margin so you're safe and you're in the clear.
Yeah.
And I honestly stay budgeted, stay as tight as you can, and don't overspend.
Absolutely. What else? Arian, what about you?
She said weekly. She probably thinks I'm obsessive. I'm daily.
Daily.
I am too.
I didn't want to sound crazy.
I feel you, Morgan. I'm like this.
I'm so OCD.
I didn't want to sound nuts though, so I'm like, weekly.
And it's because cash flow management, people have said for all entrepreneurs, that's the number one pain point. It's the reality that people sometimes get paid net 60, net 30, and you're like, okay, I have money on paper, but where is my money in the account? Mm-hmm. And you're budgeting according to that, and you're trying to just figure things out. So yeah, for me, it's daily. It's hiring the proper professionals. That's first and foremost. Making sure that you have people that are familiar with your industry is very, very key. I know from personal experience, I ran a PR and marketing company for years, and then I had to switch accountants, literally, just because I was like, okay, this person is just not familiar with my industry, and I need somebody who can help me better off in this space and what this cash flow looks like. And there are tools even out there. Mastercard even has tools, but there's different tools, banking tools that just help you be able to manage your cash flow better. But for me, I'm on the money every morning. Like it's a daily thing to see what is going on, to make sure we're staying in line with our budgets, just to stay on track. I love Sharifa's model of, she's like, I'm overestimating all the time. They know, my team knows though, how particular I am about the budget. And we have a staff, payroll, everything, but I'm like this, watching everything like a hawk. But really it's the proper professionals in there and the people who've been there that can show you how to, okay, how do you float like this? And I will say for product companies, there are even factors, people who will front in the interim. If you have a purchase order that's out there, they know that that is money in the bank.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh gosh, but I need however much money to produce another 100,000 units because Bloomingdale's just called, even though I'm waiting on the PO from Target. And it's just like, how do I handle the in-between while I need to go produce to order, for this next PO that is even larger. So there are people who will definitely front that in the interim in exchange, of course, for interest paid on it. But at least they know that that's secured money that's there and we can float you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, I am so obsessive with our cash flow. We have a financial model, and every single day, it's like you need to know what your burn is. You need to know what expenses are coming in and going out, and you need to know, what's being charged to the account. So I'm also looking at our finances every day, but every single month, we're also going back and we're reconciling and we're saying, how did we go over our monthly burn? And if so, why? But I think the biggest thing for founders, you have to be really close to your numbers. And I think some of the tips that Arian you shared are really practical, right? Some of the things that we do is we'll actually do discounts if you pay up front, because it optimizes for people actually wanting to pay up front, and then they feel like they're getting something as well. It's not necessarily just, okay, we're a startup, can you support us? But it's, you're getting something too, we're getting something, we both win. And then something that we do for agencies that we work with or any sort of contracted work is we'll see if we can push off the payment. And I don't mean that in like the bad way. What I mean is like, sometimes you can stagger payments. You can say, okay, this is, a 10K payment. I'm going to pay it in 3 installments. One's 2,000, one's 3,000, one's 5,000, right? And you actually break out the payments and you say, okay, I'm paying one first month, the second upon this set of deliverables, whatever it may be. But anything that you can do around that really helps with cash flow. So back in the days when we were working out of offices, any sort of contractual agreements around land, leasing offices, leasing office spaces, or negotiating out of your office space, which was something that we did when COVID-19 happened. Any sort of way that you can stagger out the payments can be really helpful from a cash flow perspective. But it's really important to know what are the things that are going to cost you money that you're not necessarily accounting for. So your employee payroll taxes, it's never just your employee's salary, it's your employee's payroll taxes, it's your business insurance, right? It is the taxes that you have to pay on your income or on the revenue that your company generates. It's, any sort of accounting services when you're filing your taxes at the end of the year. And so there are certain things that you are going to have to pay for that it's really important to know. And so it's really important to make sure that you're on top of those through having advisors and through having people within your network and through having financial, a CFO or some sort of finance support, so that you're not coming up on the end of the month or the end of the year and saying, whoa, I didn't expect to pay this. There's a wrench in things. Exactly.
Very well said, all of you. And I can hear the obsession and I can hear the falling in love with the numbers in all of you. Let's hear a story before we get to kind of a last kind of lightning round of rapid fire questions. Sharifa, we've established, right, that scaling a business is tough. It requires commitment, stamina, obsession, but it also means learning from mistakes and learning from mistakes of your own, learning from the mistakes of others. If you're lucky, you get to learn from the mistakes of others. Can you recall a specific time when something did go wrong as you were scaling and how you turned it around?
Yes. My first trade show that we started years ago, it started out, it was a smaller trade show. It was cool. It was intimate, 70 brands max. People loved it. We stayed like that for a couple of seasons. And of course, when you do that, you become the cool kid, right? And then, of course, more people wanted to join. You let people join. You start building your business. You want things to get bigger and bigger. But then you vastly realize that the thing that you had that was so cool and that was so intimate and that was so paid attention to, it gets too big. And when you scale your business, sometimes big doesn't mean that it's always great. And when you get too big, sometimes then the other people don't want to be interested in it anymore. So that was one mistake I definitely think we made. We built this massive trade show that was cool for certain things, but it wasn't what it needed to be for what we wanted. So we had to then scale back and build a whole nother show to make it intimate, make it more interesting and appealing for retailers to come to. Because once you get big when it comes to fashion, there's different levels to it, right? And I think that people within the fashion industry love the exclusivity. They love knowing they want to be the first to find out what's hot. And once you lose that zest, no one wants to come to your show anymore. So I can say that that was the one mistake that we made. We made our show too big and we learned from it. And we started another show where we scaled back and we were more intimate and it became a bigger success than it was before.
Nice. That's a really great one. Really great example. So let's jump into some quick round robins as we get closer to wrapping up, and I'll just fire a question and let each of you kind of jump in with your quick response. The number one tip for scaling a business is?
Everybody pause. We can just say cash flow management.
Cash flow management. That's right. Anybody else?
Fall in love with the journey, because sometimes it's great. Sometimes there are highs and sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea how I'm going to fulfill this order. I have no idea what I just promised. Fall in love with the journey.
I'm going to just say, believe in you. Believe in what you're doing. You have to believe in what you're doing in order for anything.
We're giving all these life principles and change minds to seize the moment.
Practical.
You can change your answer, Arian. Go ahead. Add more.
To seize the moment. Yes.
There you go, Arian.
I would second.
You got another bite at the apple.
Yeah.
Next one.
I would second.
Leading a team requires
patience. Go ahead, Arian.
I heard patience. What did you say, Arian?
I said discipline.
Discipline.
Yeah.
The desire to be a leader.
Desire. Yeah. I think one of the things, Sharifa, you mentioned earlier also authenticity, right? Willingness to share and bring all of yourself to the table, good and bad, right? People don't always, people actually lose trust if you only tell them the good news and never tell them when things are not going great, right? They start to wonder about that too. So I think that authenticity example is a really important one. And definition of success. Success is?
For me, fulfillment.
Letting go of fear or the expectations placed on you by society or by your peers and choosing to do whatever feels like it's your calling.
Wow.
I'm going to say success to me is uncompletion, because you always want to get to that next level. And no matter how high you think you may be, there's always something else that you're trying to achieve. So uncompletion.
There we go. All right, well, let's end on one more question, a little bit of a reflection from each of you. Being an entrepreneur means you're problem solving on the fly, right? And if we're honest, there's plenty of stuff that you are making up as you go, right? What do you do when you don't know how to do something? What's your go-to? What's your MO when you are faced with trying to solve for something that you have not had to do before or don't have any idea how to do it?
I'm going to say, go ahead. Sorry.
If people are being honest, the first realistic, honest answer is Google University. And then they're going to call somebody. And it is. You're gonna Google and then you're going to call somebody. I'm sorry, but go ahead, Sharifa, with the professional answer.
No. I was going to say I would call someone. I am with you with the Google University, to be honest with you.
Okay.
I would say what I've learned is to always seek opinions, but ask at least 3 to 5 people, because you want a diverse enough set of opinions and perspectives that they're going to uncover the rough edges of whatever it is that you're missing.
Absolutely. Well said. Well, thank you all very much. This has been incredible. I love talking with entrepreneurs. I love the battle scars that we all develop as we go on this journey. We've heard a lot of really fantastic advice here about enjoying the journey, about being authentic, about being patient and disciplined and bringing your whole self to what you do, falling in love with your numbers, staying committed to your teams, understanding what it means to make a mistake and keep going. and learn from those mistakes. These are invaluable tools. We listed off a number of actual concrete tools that people can consider. And we're really excited to share this wisdom, a lot of it learned the hard way in that cauldron of being an entrepreneur. So thank you for joining us, and we will wrap it up there. Have a great afternoon.
Thank
You
you.
too. Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.